Hey guys, welcome to my first drive video on Audi's RS7 Performance. This model was actually launched last summer alongside the RS6 Performance. I've had this car for a week in the middle of winter, hence how grubby it is. I personally haven't been particularly well this year, so I haven't got to use it that much. And it's going back this afternoon, and I thought I'd better turn the cameras on and film something, because it's not every day that you get the chance and the opportunity to have the keys to something like this. And as you know, I try my very best to share everything I have and all the opportunities I get with you lot. Audi UK removed the regular RS6 and RS7 from the lineup when the performance trim was launched. But there are three models available of this particular car. The base spec RS7 Performance, which is about £116,000. We then have the carbon black, which this particular press car is. It's £125,000. And then we have the flagship Vorsprung, which is just over £130,000. This particular example is in the beautiful Ascari blue, although as we've already talked about, it's pretty grubby. So I'd call that Ascari blue / brown. And in terms of optional extras on top of this carbon black edition, well, it has the RS Sport Suspension Plus option, which we'll talk more about once we get the car out on the road. And it also has the £9,200 ceramic brake option, although I understand that you can no longer option those brakes on this particular carbon black edition. I would always have an RS6 over an RS7. I personally think they're better looking, definitely more practical, and they're a little bit cheaper. But I do appreciate and respect the RS7. And I think this very latest generation, I think it's called the C8, looks really good, especially fitted with these beautiful 22-inch forged performance alloy wheels. I banged on about these wheels last year when I had the RS6 Performance, and I have to say they are still my absolute favourite OEM wheel on sale today. Not only do they look fantastic, they also save a whopping 20 kilos of weight. And that is 20 kilos of unsprung mass, which does make a huge difference in terms of performance. And the weight saving doesn't stop there either. Audi Sport have removed some of the sound deadening from the interior, which is a bonus because then you get more induction sound, more exhaust sound, more organic engine sound. They've tweaked things like the rear axle steering. They've also played around with the Quattro all-wheel drive system to make it more of a driver's car. And when you walk up to it for the first time and you look at the front axle, for example, you can see there's definitely more negative camber. Under the bonnet, we have the familiar 4-litre V8 twin turbo, although Audi Sport have decided to turn the wick up a little bit. It now produces a whopping 630 horsepower and 850 Newton meters of torque. That is mated to the familiar ZF 8-speed automatic gearbox, and that's connected to Audi's Quattro all-wheel drive system that we've already talked about. When you combine all of that, it gives this RS7 Performance a claimed 0 to 62 time of just 3.4 seconds. It will also go on to a limited top speed of 174 miles an hour. And I got to test that top speed in the RS6 Performance last year in Germany. And that car absolutely smashed into its limiter without any issues whatsoever. And I'm in no doubt, especially in this slippery RS7 form, that if this car didn't have a limiter, it would break the 200 mile an hour mark. First thing to talk about is the interior and the driving position. This is a very familiar cabin to me because I had that RS6 long-termer about 12 months ago. And I've always liked this cabin in terms of design, the way it looks, the way it makes you feel when you step in and out of the car. But it is getting a little bit dated. This was introduced back in about 2018 when the current A6 and A7 were introduced. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It is lacking in physical buttons, but they have updated and made some of the infotainment system better over those years. And providing, like me, you use Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, well, it all integrates together really, really well. Audi have always been the king of the virtual cockpit, or the digital displays, if you like, and this one is no different. What they haven't always done so well is head-up displays. I'm not talking about the actual graphics, because graphics are really good. Everything I need to see are in the windscreen. But what they seem to get slightly wrong is the reflections that we get off the dashboard. So they've used a few different leathers and plastics on the dashboard, and I can see the vents, for example, reflecting in this light. And I can see the surround of the head-up display reflecting. So this slightly different plastic is basically highlighted in the windscreen in front of me, and that's always frustrated me a little bit with Audi's head-up display, because other manufacturers, like, yes, I'm going to say it, BMW, seem to get that bang on. But aside from that, I have to say it's a really nice cabin. The seats are comfortable, very comfortable, reasonably supportive, and they fit my lanky frame pretty well. Where this car starts to fall slightly short, for taller drivers at least, is the driving position. I'm sitting a little bit high, not ridiculously high, and I said I have plenty of room above my bobble hat, but I just feel like I could be sitting a couple of inches lower. And also the ergonomics, I talk about that quite a lot on my channel, because some manufacturers like Porsche, BMW get the ergonomics perfectly right in terms of driving position, but Audi always seem to slightly miss the trick. And what I mean by that is, when I'm sitting here comfortable, especially on longer journeys on motorways and stuff, and got the cruise control set, I like to just gently hold the wheel at 2:45. But normally my elbows would be touching this center armrest and the door card armrests, but in the majority of Audis and Volkswagen Group in general, for whatever reason, I just can't get that to work. So I can never fully relax on longer journeys unless I kind of hold the bottom of the rim of the wheel, but I don't suggest doing that because you don't have much control down here. So again, that's a minor complaint in an otherwise really nice cabin. The wheels, lovely, it's covered in Alcantara. In fact, the headlining in this one is covered in Alcantara. We have some kind of blue carbon honeycomb the top of the dashboard there, which looks really good. The Quattro, it's all those small details that come together, like these lovely little real aluminium paddles, that make this car and cabin feel somewhere close to its 130 odd thousand pound price tag. You might have noticed that I didn't start this on-road piece timing this car's acceleration figures. There's two reasons for that. Number one, it's cold, slippery and greasy outside, so the RS7 maybe doesn't stand a chance of getting close to its claim figures. And number two, this particular press car is fitted with P0s. I'm not going to sit here and bag Pirelli's tyres, but I am going to say that when the RS6 and RS7 performance were announced and the original press release came out about 12 months ago, Audi Sport stated in that press release that these models would specifically come with Continental's Sport Contact 7 tyre, which is a tyre I haven't used or tried yet, but speaking to the likes of Jonathan Benson, it's an incredible high performance or ultra high performance tyre, and it's a tyre that was homologated and designed for this particular car. For whatever reason, the two press cars that I've tried haven't come on those tyres. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with the P0s that are on this, but they're the same tyres that you would get on the regular RS7. They're the same tyre that's been around for years now, and specific tyres that are homologated for specific cars and models do make a difference in terms of ride and handling and overall grip. So it's a real shame that I still haven't had the opportunity to try the proper tyres on the performance variant of the RS6 and RS7. Let's just try a cheeky launch control. Here we go. Putting tyres aside, let's talk about the ride and handling. The majority of RS6s and RS7s that I've had in the current generation, so over the past 4 or so years, have all come fitted with the RS adaptive air suspension. And I've always raved about how good the ride quality is. And in fact, when I pitched that RS6 long-termer against my brand new at the time M3 Touring, the biggest standout feature of the RS6 compared to the M3 Touring was the ride quality. Even though it was on much bigger wheels and smaller profile tyres, the air suspension just did wonders along our rather bumpy and pathetic UK roads. This particular RS7 Performance has the optional RS Sports Suspension Plus. What does that mean? Well, essentially, Audi Sport remove the air suspension and replace it with traditional coils. It's still adaptive, so I have 3 different settings, but it's now sitting on springs. That also helps, I believe, to save a little bit of extra weight. Does that mean that that wonderful carpet air suspension has now been removed? In a way, yes. It's meant that I've always been in comfort and the softest possible suspension mode in the time that I've had this car, because when you do ramp it right up, it becomes very, very stiff. So you do lose some of the ride quality, but most importantly, it still rides pretty well. And I would say that even with this optional RS Sport Suspension Plus and these massive 22-inch wheels, it still rides better than something like the current M3 and M4, and certainly the current F90 M4 competition. So you don't lose all of that wonderful ride quality, but of course it is compromised the minute you get rid of that air aspect. But when you look at the positives of the RS Sport Suspension Plus, well, you do get better handling. The whole car feels more planted and more of a sports car. Actually sits about 4mm lower than the air suspension version, but when you throw it into a corner like this, albeit very damp, you can feel the car rotating. It's talking to you. Oh yes, oh, it's just awesome. Everything feels a bit more organic with this suspension. That's probably because I'm used to coils. I'm used to traditional coil sprung suspension over air sprung, and I guess that is one complaint of RS6s and RS7s that I have had in the past on the air suspension, is sometimes you feel a little bit disconnected. Ride quality amazing, handling also amazing because it deals with all the bumps etc really well, but you just feel like you're lacking that last bit of connection with the road, whereas you throw coils back in again and everything seems to come alive a bit more, and the car is talking to me and I know what's going on. It even has relatively good steering feel. That's impressive when you consider that this car is 5 meters long, 2 tons in weight, yet it feels really, really good. It talks to me, it tells me what's going on. It's just, yeah, it's impressive. We're going to get onto the engine next because, well, I can't avoid it for much longer. The last thing I thought that this car needed was extra horses and extra torque. And I'm not going to claim to say that I can feel the extra horses, but you can definitely feel that extra torque. It's mapped differently, seems to come in stronger and a little bit lower, and it also seems to last a little bit longer. Some of that might have to do with, you know, the fact that this car has less weight. It definitely has less unsprung weight as well, thanks to those gorgeous wheels and the carbon ceramic brakes. But the way this car picks up, aside from the slight hesitation with the initial throttle input, and that's something that Audi's RS cars seem to suffer from, and I never know why that is. That initial sort of prod of the accelerator is a little bit dead. But once you've lived with this car for a while and you anticipate that, you pick the throttle up a little bit earlier out of a corner, it's just so ballistically fast. And I'm sure that's not going to surprise you, because when you look at the figures on paper, etc., well, that's what you expect. I think this particular press car, the fact it's done exactly 10,000 miles, which is very rare for press cars, means that it's been properly used and properly running, and this motor is probably running a lot healthier than the one that was in that RS6 that was brand new and only just run in, that I had 6-7 months ago. It's just ballistic. Any gear, it really feels more like more like an Airbus A350 taking off than a car. It's that torque, it's just unreal, and that's what you feel. It's also helped by the soundtrack, although it's muffled with modern day restrictions, OPF filters, etc., you name it. Audi Sport have had to do it. It's definitely louder in this cabin, thanks to them getting rid of some of the sound deadening, etc. It's got the sports exhaust, which I believe is standard on the performance models, and I think it actually sounds really good for a car that is built and produced in 2024. When you combine that wonderful soundtrack and that ballistic performance, well, it definitely puts a smile on your face. And each and every time you put your foot down, especially when you're in the optimum gear, you just can't believe it. Before we end the video, let's just have a bit of fun along this twisty section of road. It's very greasy outside, as I mentioned earlier, so I am being cautious. Something we haven't talked about is the brakes. The brakes. I've never had an issue with Audi's steel setup on the current RS6 and RS7. Never. Have they ever felt underpowered? No. Would you ever take your RS6 and RS7 out on track? Probably not. What are these near on 10,000 pound carbon ceramics like? To be honest, they look awesome, but they're just too powerful. Especially with this car that, as we already talked about, has 10,000 miles on the clock. The brakes and the pads are fully bedded in, and they're just so aggressive. I haven't acclimatized to them. I still can't operate them in a smooth manner. I took Lou out a couple of days ago in this, and she thought that there was something wrong with my right foot, because every time I just graze the brake pedal, it feels like it wants to send you through the windscreen. So if you're looking at buying one of these or the RS6, as good as these brakes are and as sexy as they look, in terms of application, to me at least, they're just too punchy and too powerful. You don't need them. The steels are fantastic. What's my conclusion on this car? Is it worth 120, 130, or in this press car's case, 140 odd thousand pounds? It's really hard to say. If it was my money, as talked about in the intro, it would go straight on the RS6 equivalent, because as far as I'm concerned, it's a better looking car, it's more practical, and I just love the RS6. Who doesn't? So this is a bit of a niche of a car, but you can understand why Audi have built it. Although the RS6 is more practical, this is still a big car, and certainly a car that you could use as your family weapon. The rear bench is relatively spacious, does lack a bit of light back there, especially as this has got no sunroof, but the boot is massive and really, really usable. If you think about it, it's like a giant hatchback, this A7 or RS7. In terms of load lugging, well, it doesn't really get much better. And if you fold those rear seats down, you could quite comfortably get a couple of bikes in there or whatever you want, the kitchen sink. So in terms of practicality, it's not too bad at all. It's just not up there with the RS6. Like so many new and used cars today, there are some bargains to be had online. I had a quick look earlier on, and main dealers are selling brand new and unregistered RS7 performances with 10, 12, 13 grand off, and that's listed. So I'm sure if you walked into a dealership and they had physical stock, you could probably get another 5 or 6 grand off that. And then you start looking at lightly used 3 or 6 month old examples, and they sit around the £100,000 mark, which is still a lot of money. But in today's world, actually, when you look at it on the outset and what you get, the performance, the amount of metal work you get in this car, well, it's definitely going to be tempting for some people out there. Just experience this one more time before I end the video. It's just ballistic. It really gives me a proper head rush. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. As I talked about right at the start, I've not been that well, but I'm glad that I've managed to bring something to the channel and hopefully entertain you lot. Until the next video, take it easy, and I'll see you then.